Hey everybody, this is Sarah, and welcome back to PMO Refuge. To begin, I apologize for missing last week. I just had a couple things come up in my schedule, so I was unable to post. Originally on this channel, I used to try to stick to a specific regimen when I post. And don't get me wrong, I do want to keep it regular, but I don't want to force, especially content this sensitive, on you all. So I'm kind of developing a little bit more of a balance with this channel when I release videos, especially once this course is over. But like I said, I still want to keep it regular. But yeah, I definitely don't want to turn it into worrying about, subscribers, worrying about people who are viewing, so on and so forth. So I just want to throw that out there. But I do apologize, like I said, for missing last week. Just had a couple things come up. So this week, however, that's what we're here to talk about. This latest episode, we are going to talk about what lengths will you go to stop, right? So a lot of times, if you look on, NoFap Reddit, you'll read stories about people, and I don't even question a lot of times that they are experiencing grief over this addiction. I don't question, far from me to be the judge of another person's grief, right? And sometimes too, I feel like this grief also just comes from lack of knowledge, because I suffered from the same thing, in the earlier days of facing this addiction, when I was starting to wake up and kind of notice the bad habits that I was having. But it does remain to be said this. It is interesting to note when you start asking people questions about, well, what have you done specifically to stop relapsing into this addiction? A lot of times you will find out that such ones have not done anything. They have done nothing to change their day-to-day routine. They have done nothing in terms of research. A lot of times it's just willpower to try to stop. That's it, just raw willpower, right? If you kind of comb over what I've built so far in these series of lectures, where we started with the basics about gaining knowledge of your addiction, gaining knowledge of your triggers, starting to rewire your actions, which we're kind of talking about a lot right now, but starting to rewire your daily routine, starting to rewire the way you look at maybe the opposite sex, the way you look at relationships. Again, you talk to such ones and they don't really do anything in that area, And it's so important that you have to start making sacrifices. You have to start looking at how far of a length will you go to stop your craving for this addiction. And it's more than just willpower, right? So before we kind of get into the how, let's first get into the why, and it sounds a little bit self-explanatory at first. Like, why do you need to start making sacrifices? Why do you have to start questioning how far you will go, right? Well, again, I've said this before in previous lectures here, but willpower is just not enough to beat this addiction, especially the longer and longer you've been in it. You just can't. You can't keep on saying, oh, one day, I'll just break free, or, oh, I can't wait to overcome this one day. Like, no, it's just not going to happen, So you need to get that out of your head, because really, a lot of times, not to be too strict with this, but a lot of times that just turns into a coping mechanism, right? You start kind of feeling, you start thinking those feel-good thoughts, right? I can't wait till one day where I don't suffer from this, and, so on and so forth. And yeah, don't get me wrong, that day is a great day to be had, and it's something great to look for. But if you're not putting in any kind of work or sacrifice, it's just not going to happen. no matter how much you want it to happen. So to kind of get into the how, let's use an illustration. This is a good bridge, right, between the why and the how. So let's imagine, and I used to have this happen to me. I used to be a very, very skinny person. And I longed for the day to at least just have some kind of muscle, especially in my chest and in my arms. I was just so terribly skinny, and I wanted that. I wanted to look better. I wanted to look more athletic and in shape. And I wasn't even an ugly guy. It's just I didn't have any of that muscle. And what would have happened, because what eventually did end up happening was I started to go to the gym, and then when at the gym, I started to realize that I needed to use a lot of high weight workouts. What I mean by that is bench press. I really needed to hit that hard. Bicep curls, and harder than the usual person, because maybe a normal person who came to the gym, their arms look fine, so yeah, maybe they would do those rounds and those circuits and workouts, but they wouldn't need to focus on them as hard as I did because I was so skinny. But again, what would have happened if I would not have put in that workout? If I would have never went to the gym? Would I have gained all that muscle in, those specific parts of my body? Well, no, right? You probably caught on to this illustration right away. It would have been nice wishful thinking, but nothing would have changed. And so it's the same thing. Again, it's nice to think about, oh, I'm so terrible, or, one day I'll get over this addiction and long for that day. But if you're not putting in any kind of effort, if you're not putting in any kind of action, it's just not going to happen. So the question is, how do you do it? And there's a couple of ways, right? Because it really does depend on how far into this addiction you have gotten, right? But, for example, if you are, heavily using pornography, one good way to look is just what is your computer or internet or phone usage, right? That's kind of an elementary place to start. Now, maybe you even need to dig a little deeper into your psyche, right? Because if you even kind of scoff at that thought, if you can't even picture putting away your phone even more than how you're using it now, if that seems impossible, well, you may have an addiction to your phone as well, so you need to look into that. But you need to then start monitoring its usage, right? Because maybe that's even a good way to start too. Just start putting up blockers. I know that it's possible to get around blockers, but if anything, that'll kind of help rewire your brain to see, because I know I started to do that once, right? Where I put up blockers, but I knew how to get around them. But what started happening was the pop-ups would come up, saying like, hey, this is a restricted site. And it would at least remind me, hey, you set this up because you want to beat this addiction. Right? So at least it'll make you start to pause and think. And for some of you, that may be good enough. But if it's not, if you need more than that, then you need to look into using your phone even less, than you do now. Or your computer, however you get access to your addiction. Now, maybe that's not enough. Maybe you're saying, well, Sarah, I did that, and I still ended up using it. Well, then it might be time to, again, ask yourself, well, how far am I willing to go with this? So I know for myself, I started to literally physically leave my phone in public spaces, even in my own house. And I set a rule for myself where I said I was not allowed to use my phone in the bedroom or in the bathroom at all. Like, it's just prohibited. It's not allowed. It has to stay in the public area, the hallway, the living room, the kitchen, or if I'm out in public. But it cannot go into those two places. So I started to set rules in that area. Now, if you need to even take a step further, because maybe you do, I've read stories. I even had a friend of mine where he actually got rid of his smartphone, and he literally started to use a flip phone. I'm kidding you not. And not the new flip phones, where it still has a screen. I mean the you can't get videos on it. It's literally like a dial phone. He was using that because it was that important to him. He recognized the danger, and to him it was, hey, this is a nuisance at times. Hey, this is annoying at times. But I would rather go through this than continue to fall prey to my addiction. So, again, it's, this is just an illustrative way to look at it of how far will you go. And this principle even applies to coming forward with your addiction. Talking to family members, talking to loved ones, talking to even like a spouse or a partner, talking to a therapist, talking to a spiritual leader. Well, again, how far will you go? Because if you're too embarrassed to come forward with everything, then you have not. One thing I like that I've heard David Goggins used to say this. He used to say, you haven't suffered enough. And that's how I used to tell myself when I was overcoming this addiction, where it was, oh, I'm too afraid to do this. I'm afraid of this person to find out, or if they find out, this is going to happen. And I started to tell myself, well, then you haven't suffered enough. You have to keep going. So again, even coming forward about your addiction, if you're too afraid, well, you're still letting your addiction control your life. And, you're still going to succumb to your old habits. But this principle you can just use in any area, whether it's, maybe you're not a gym person. So to overcome this addiction, to help it, you need to start going to the gym. Maybe you feel like you're too tired. Well, if you have to look at that, you may say, well, even if I'm tired, I may have to take up a second job. Because number one, that'll make me extra money. But number two, that's going to keep me busy, and that's going to keep me away from my old destructive habits. Whatever it is, you can literally fill in the blank here. But the whole principle of this is, how far are you willing to go to overcome this addiction? Because, again, if to kind of just wrap this up, if you just continue to go about your business as usual, then sad to say, progress will not be made. This is Sarah for this week, and I'll talk to you all later.